The question was a nice, short, easy question that could be answered very easily, which was, what is the driving force behind sectarianism in the Middle East and the implications for the UK? I gave a speech recently at the Muslim Council of Britain, which did a Muslim unity iftar, which was something I kind of pushed them to do a little bit, because I'm someone who's quite worried about growing sectarianism both in the Muslim majority world and here in the UK. Just a few weeks ago, 5 or 6 guys were prosecuted in court for the very first sectarian attack on record in Britain, which happened on Edgware Road last year. So, you know, we shouldn't exaggerate or overplay the tensions here in the UK, but we have to be cognizant of the fact that British Muslims come from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of immigrant communities, various links to the Middle East and to the subcontinent, and therefore the problems that are going on over there will inevitably start seeping over here if they haven't already. I was in the United States a few months ago. I was giving a speech in Detroit, and one of my hosts was telling me, you know, Dearborn, Michigan, some of you may know, one of the biggest, you know, one of the largest populations of Arabs living anywhere outside the Middle East, having massive problems there between the various centres and mosques, between Syrians and Lebanese, between Sunnis and Shias, between people from Saudi Arabia and Iran, etc., etc. And, you know, I look at that and I think, thankfully that hasn't happened here yet, and I was delighted to see both the Muslim Council of Britain, iftar, seeing scholars and clerics and imams from various communities speaking, seeing the various videos recently came out against ISIS in Iraq. I mean, what's driving it? In my view, politics. I mean, it really annoys me when people think this is a theological debate, as if people are, you know, blowing each other up because of something that happened 1400 years ago. And actually, it's an argument that not just, you know, it's a kind of symbiotic argument in that many Muslims who are sectarian on either side will push this narrative for their own agendas. And then you have non-Muslim journalists, you have British and American and Western journalists who are covering the conflict, and for them it's a very easy explanation as well. You know, you can do a Google search, do a Google News search of headlines involving Sunni and Shia over the last few weeks. You know, the number of pieces that have been written in American and British magazines about the ancient hatred, and this is the result of 1400 years of hate and tribal rivalries, and, you know, that's all very well, but, you know, why wasn't it happening 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago? By definition, this is a current affairs event. That's why it's happening now, as a result of events now. It also enables certain people in the Western world to wash their hands of some, I say some, not all, but some responsibility for what's going on in the Middle East. For example, in Iraq. If you look at a country like Iraq, that was a country where, you know, you've heard the phrase sushi, where there were Sunni Shia marriages and children produced from those marriages. And yet in 2003, when the Americans took over Iraq and set up the Iraqi Governing Council, one of the first things Paul Bremer, the US Viceroy on the ground, did was he distributed jobs, posts in government, based on whether you were a Sunni, a Shia, a Kurd, etc. And I'm not saying that was the creator of sectarian violence, but it was certainly a driver. It certainly encouraged people to think of themselves in sectarian blocks. And right now, today, you have the conflict of Syria, which is spilling out across the whole region and is totally out of control. You have Pakistan, if any of you have links to Pakistan. The killings that have been going on there against Christians, against Shias, against Ahmadis is out of control. But again, we must be very clear. Is this a majority problem or a minority problem? I often find what's interesting, and I have conversations with Muslim friends of mine, both Sunni and Shia, and I find what's so interesting is we Muslims get really, really upset when a non-Muslim generalizes about Muslims. And we say, oh, you can't blame all of us for what Al-Qaeda did. You can't blame all of us for what Anjum Chowdhury says or whatever it is. It's so outrageous that people generalize about Muslims vis-a-vis non-Muslims. And then when we're talking within ourselves about different sects, then we do exactly the same thing. Oh, well, it's all the fault of the Shias because of what Iran's doing. Oh, it's all the fault of... look at the Sunnis. They're all responsible for what ISIS is doing. And we do the same generalizing. It's madness at no level. Not at a religious level, not at a national or ethnic level, should we be making generalizations about big groups of people based on minority behaviors, whether it's, you know, Muslims discussing Sunni-Shia tensions, or whether it's, you know, UKIP discussing Romanians all being criminals, because some of them are. I reject bigotry of all types on that ground. Yes? Like Desert Island Discs now. What are some books that I've read that have changed my life? That is a very good question. I'm not sure I want to reveal that. It might make me look bad or good, I'm not sure. Let me say this. Let me answer it in my own way. I would say the things that have changed my life in terms of reading is reading things I don't agree with. For me, I'm not sure if any of you noticed, but I'm quite argumentative, a little bit disputatious individual, and therefore I quite like a row. I quite like arguing different sides of the argument, I quite like debating things, and therefore it's always bored me. I get very frustrated when people will only watch things that they agree with. They'll only read things that they agree with. You know, I spend my life reading not just The Guardian, but also the Daily Mail comment pages, the Daily Telegraph comment pages, right-wing blogs as well as left-wing blogs, Israeli newspapers as well as Palestinian news sites. Because I genuinely think we live in a world where now in the age of the internet, I mean, I'm an internet journalist, I should, you know, some might say I shouldn't be saying this, but we live in an age where because of the access to disparate sources of news and being able to switch off the old BBC, ITV duopoly or even the Sky News, cable news dominance, we're now able to get our news from so many other sources. That's a good thing in that you get a diversity of opinion, you get voices that you could never hear before who are maybe excluded from mainstream channels. That's a good thing, but it's a bad thing in the sense that a lot of surveys and a lot of reports suggest that we're now clustering around news sites, news channels that only tell us what we already want to hear, that only tell us one side of the argument, and I think that's a mistake. I think there's a mistake if the BBC turns into Fox News, as some people on the right want to do. They want to get rid of due impartiality in broadcasting. I think that's been a disaster in America. America today is a massively divided and polarized society, where a recent Pew report found that Americans are now deciding where they live, who they make friends with, who they marry on the basis of political beliefs, religious beliefs, ideological beliefs. Massively polarized society. And I don't think you can pretend that the huge divide in media consumption and what people are reading and watching doesn't play a massive role in that. So my view is, without naming specific books, I would say if you're interested in a particular subject, please try and read the other side of the argument first before you just read things that you nod along with and say, this is right, I'm right, brilliant. That's my only piece of advice. Yes? Hello? Oh, that's a very good question. I did a thing for Channel 4 last year, like a 60-second thing. I wish I could remember what I said. So profound. What does Ramadan mean to me? To pick two words, I think Ramadan means, it means lots of things to lots of people. Let's not pretend we can boil down the holiest month of the calendar in a catchphrase or a kind of bumper sticker. But for me personally, especially living as a Muslim minority in a majority non-Muslim country, for me it means solidarity, it means community, it means reaching out to people who I may have not reached out to for the rest of the year. For me, it means trying, I don't think I always achieve this, and if my wife was here, she would laugh her head off, trying to switch off from your work, from your social media, from your various devices, and trying to reconnect with family members who you haven't seen all year, community members you haven't seen all year, mosques that you may have not visited for several years. I think that is what it means to me in terms of reaching out and standing side by side, breaking bread with other people side by side for 30 days in a way that you can't do in any other period of the year. You just don't have the self-discipline. It's also about self-discipline. Yes?
What are the risks involved putting Islam at the forefront of your identity? The reason I ask that is because at times Muslims can be self-marginalising. The issue that, again, is associated with that is it becomes my Islam against your Islam.
Yeah.
The way I practice my Islam isn't the way how you should be practicing yours. And I think that's a big issue because some Muslims don't feel like they're part of the British Muslim community because they don't feel like they're represented. They're not part of the Ramadan.
It's a very good question. In case you didn't hear it, the question was about how much do you thrust Islam to the forefront of your identity? How dangerous is that? The questioner was suggesting that we now have a situation where a lot of Muslims don't feel part of the wider British Muslim community because people are rigorously defining Islam in my Islam versus your Islam in a narrow way. Self-homogenizing, I think is a rather nice phrase that was used. I think that's a very good point. And I think, again, we shouldn't be hypocritical about this. We Muslims tend to go out and complain about media coverage homogenizing us. We complain about the fact the media treats us as monolithic, rightly so, because it does, and it's wrong. But then, again, in our own little circles, our own little gatherings, our own communities, we do the same thing, at least in our rhetoric, if not in our practice. And you know, I have a problem with people who say, Islam says this, or Islam says that, because, you know, show me Mr. Islam. Who is Mr. Islam today? We don't live in the age of an infallible prophet who can tell us what is and isn't Islam, and a lot of what we think it is about debate and dialogue and discussion is open. You know, I made this point. Omar very kindly mentioned the Oxford Union debate. By the way, no conspiracy. The Oxford Union had a row with the media company that films all their debates, and the media company in protest pulled down all of the debates of all the speakers and all the speeches that they've ever filmed at the Oxford Union, which included mine, which was so harmful to my ego. But in that speech, that thankfully did well and got some audiences, one of the points I made in that speech was to Anne-Marie Waters, who was the first speaker on the opposition side, and she kept going on about the Sharia says, which is another common phrase, again, not just non-Muslims, but Muslims say this, as if there is one monolithic single code. And I said that, right, show me the book of Sharia, I've not seen it. It's not the Quran, because the Quran talks about Islamic law sometimes very patchily, sometimes very in a nuanced way, sometimes not at all, about various aspects of law which we get from other sources. So show me this single monolithic homogenized Sharia law that 1.2 billion or whatever it is, 1.6 billion Muslims across the world supposedly all agree on. So I think it's a very important question that while we criticize other people for not treating us as monolithic and not homogenizing us, we shouldn't do the same. We should be, and that's why, coming back to the earlier question, the first question, that Muslim Council of Britain was so important, that event a couple of weeks ago, because the MCB is often attacked for being reactionary and conservative and inward-looking, and some of the criticisms of the MCB are very legitimate. I've made them myself. Some of them are a little bit over the top, and I think it was important for a group like the MCB, which is identified as very conservative or reactionary or whatever it is, but actually does represent hundreds of organisations right through the gamut, from Salafist to Shia, to come forward and have an event that says, you know what, we're going to have different scholars from different backgrounds talking about what unites us rather than what divides us. But in uniting us, it doesn't mean that we're excluding everyone else who doesn't quite sign up to a checklist of tasks. And I think that's a problem. And I have this problem. I have a huge problem because I'm one of the few Muslim journalists out there, and I realise that pressure is not something I'm proud of, it's not something I'm happy about. And actually it's a real problem for me, because when I'm writing, on the one hand, I'm always torn, because if I'm writing about something that is Islam related, you don't want to be pigeonholed as just the Muslim journalist, that's one thing. But separately, when you are writing about an issue that is related to Islam, whether it's the Birmingham schools plot, whether it's Middle East politics, whether it's counter-terrorism, etc., on the one hand, you're torn because you feel like, as a Muslim, I want to get across certain arguments that some people here know are true, that we want to get across, that are not being heard, because let's be honest, most journalists don't know very much about Islam, don't know very much Muslims, don't work alongside Muslims. So on the one hand, you're trying to be a Muslim voice and get across Muslim arguments, quote unquote. On the other hand, yes, you're trying not to say, I'm speaking for Muslims. I've never said that. I will never say that. And people have accused me of that, of talking nonsense. But it's a real problem because you're walking on a tightrope between the two. And I don't think there's a right answer. It's just about, you know, sometimes I've got it right, sometimes I've got it wrong, I'm sure. Come to the mic. Yes, walaikum salam.